So something happened to me last week that I still can't totally wrap my head around, and I need to know if I actually have to just accept it or if there's something I can do. Let me tell you the whole thing. So last week, I was driving home from my friend's house at night. Just a normal drive home. And on the way, I noticed a car ahead of me that was driving really, really strangely. And I don't mean like they cut somebody off once. I mean, this car was swerving all over the place when there was nothing to swerve around. No obstacles, no potholes, nothing. They just could not keep the car inside their own lane. They'd drift over the line, jerk back, drift again. It was the kind of driving where your stomach just drops. Because, deep down, that something is very wrong with whoever is behind that wheel. And I had this thought, really clearly, that if I just drove on home and did nothing, this person was going to hurt somebody, maybe kill somebody. So I called the police, and while I was on the phone with them, I followed the car so I could tell the dispatcher exactly where it was going. And I want to be clear about this part, because it matters later. The dispatcher, the 911 operator, specifically asked me to keep following the driver so the police could catch up to us. That wasn't me playing hero on my own. I was doing what the emergency dispatcher told me to do. And I want to be honest about what that was actually like, because in the moment it was genuinely scary. I'm a teenager following a car that's swerving all over a dark road at night. Every time that car jerked toward the shoulder or drifted across the center line, my heart jumped because I didn't know if I was about to watch a crash happen right in front of me. I kept a good distance back because the last thing I wanted was to be anywhere near this guy if he lost control completely. And the whole time, part of my brain was saying, "What are you doing? Just go home. This isn't your job." But a louder part of me kept picturing this car plowing into another family, into somebody's kids, and me being the person who saw the whole thing coming and did nothing. I couldn't live with that version, so I stayed on the phone, and I stayed a few car lengths back, and I called out every street and every turn to the dispatcher, my voice probably shaking the whole time. So after a while, the police caught up to us, and they pulled the driver over. And I actually felt this huge wave of relief when I saw the cruiser lights come on behind him, because it meant it was finally out of my hands and into theirs. And it turned out I was completely right. The guy was extremely drunk. When the officers gave him the sobriety tests, he failed them miserably. Just completely. So they arrested him, right there. And then the officers came over to me and asked if I'd write a statement about what I saw, and they asked for my information. And at that point, I actually felt good. Like, genuinely good. I'd done the responsible thing, I'd stuck with it, and now I was helping the police put together their case against a dangerous drunk driver. I remember thinking that this was one of those rare moments where you actually get to be the good guy, where you see something wrong and you do something about it and it works out. I was writing down what I'd seen, being as helpful and detailed as I could, feeling like a decent person who'd just done a decent thing. That feeling lasted right up until I handed over my license. So I handed one of the officers my driver's license so he could copy down my address for the statement. And here's where it all turned. I'm under 18. And the officer looks at my license, and he tells me that I'm not actually allowed to be driving right now because it's past 11 at night, and where I live, there's a curfew for drivers under 18. So I explained the whole thing to him. I said, look, I would have been home before 11. I was on my way home in plenty of time. But I noticed this drunk driver, and I didn't want anyone to get hurt, so I followed him. And on top of that, when I called 911, they were the ones who asked me to keep following the guy, even though, technically that kept me out past curfew, and the officer just did not care at all. He told me, and I'm going to remember this line for the rest of my life, he said that it didn't matter. He said that even if my driving past curfew had prevented World War III, the law is the law, and he had to give me a ticket for breaking curfew. And then, on top of that, he told me that if I drove myself home from there, he'd have to give me a second ticket for it. because it was still past curfew, so I couldn't even drive home. Here I am, the person who just helped take a drunk driver off the road, and I'm not even allowed to drive my own car the rest of the way home. I had to call my parents in the middle of the night, wake them up, and have them come out to get me. And one of them had to drive home the car I'd been driving, because apparently me touching the steering wheel one more time was a crime worth a second ticket. It was honestly humiliating. I went from feeling like I'd done something genuinely brave and good to standing on the side of the road like I was the one who'd done something wrong, waiting for my mom and dad to come rescue me from a situation I got into by helping. And I just kept turning it over in my head the whole ride home. This feels so wrong. It feels backwards. I did a good thing. I might have literally saved somebody's life tonight. Some stranger who will never even know how close they came because a drunk man got stopped before he reached them. And I'm the one getting punished for it. The drunk guy gets arrested, which, fine, he absolutely should. But I get a ticket too, like the two of us are somehow both in the wrong here. Like following the rules to the exact letter mattered more than the actual reason those rules exist in the first place. The curfew law is supposed to keep kids safe, and I got punished by it for the crime of trying to keep everyone on that road safe. I couldn't make it make sense. So now I've got this ticket sitting on my desk, and honestly, I'm anxious about it. Really anxious. And I think part of why it's hitting me so hard is that this is my first real brush with the legal system, and I'm doing it as a kid who doesn't know the first thing about any of this. There's all this paperwork, and legal language I don't understand, and I have to mail something back to the court within a few days. And I read that if I just ignore it or miss the deadline, I could actually end up getting arrested over it. Arrested. Over a curfew ticket I got for helping the police, so the stakes feel enormous and I feel completely out of my depth. My parents are supportive, but they don't really know how this stuff works either, so it's kind of on me to figure it out. And my first instinct, honestly, was just to try to make it go away as quietly as possible. I've been thinking about maybe just calling the police station and asking them to reduce the fine, or asking if there's some way to just settle it and be done, because a big part of me just wants this stress gone, but another part of me is angry, because paying it feels like admitting I did something wrong, and I know in my heart I didn't. So that's why I'm asking, am I really going to have to pay this ticket? Or is there some actual way out of this? Because I don't know what I'm doing, and I've only got a few days. I'm in Pennsylvania, if that matters. Update. Okay, so I posted all of that, and a lot of you gave me advice, and I want to tell you what happened, because it did not go the way I was afraid it would. It went so much better. The biggest piece of advice I got was this: do not just call and beg them to reduce the fine. Do not just roll over and pay it. Instead, plead not guilty and fight it in court. And a bunch of people pointed me towards something specific, a legal defense called the justification defense. So that's exactly what I did. I pled not guilty, and I got a court date, and then I did my homework. Because I figured if I was going to walk into a courtroom as a teenager and argue against a police officer, I'd better show up with everything. So here's what I brought with me. First, I brought copies of my cell phone's call log, which showed exactly when I called 911. And critically, it showed that I made that call before curfew even started. So I had proof in black and white that I was already doing the right thing before I was ever technically breaking any rule. And to back that up even further, I got the same records directly from my phone carrier, so it wasn't just something I could have faked on my own phone. Then, with the help of the court clerk, who was really nice about it by the way, I got a copy of the drunk driver's criminal complaint. So I had the official record of what that man had actually been charged with. And finally, I printed out a clean copy of the actual justification law itself so I could point the judge right to it. And I want to tell you, putting all of that together was its own whole thing. Because I'd never done anything like it. I didn't know you could just ask a court clerk to help you get a copy of somebody's criminal complaint. I didn't know how to even find the text of a law, let alone read it and understand which parts applied to me. I spent hours on it. I read that justification law over and over until I actually understood what it was saying and how it fit my situation. I organized my phone records so I could hand them over cleanly instead of fumbling around. I basically taught myself a tiny piece of how the legal system works, from scratch, because I had to. And somewhere in doing all that, something shifted in me. I stopped feeling purely anxious and started feeling something more like determined. Because the more I understood the law, the more I realized I wasn't reaching. I actually had a real defense, a good one. I walked in there more prepared than I've ever been for anything in my life. I was still nervous, though. Of course I was nervous. I'm a teenager, standing up in an actual courtroom, about to argue against a uniformed police officer in front of a judge, with no lawyer, just a folder full of papers I put together myself. My hands were sweating, but underneath the nerves, for the first time since that officer handed me the ticket, I felt like I had a real shot. I was ready. So the hearing starts, and the officer speaks first. And I have to say, sitting there listening to his version of events was a strange experience because of how carefully it was worded. He testified that I was pulled over on the side of the road and that he went to investigate why I was there. And the way he framed it, if you didn't know any better, you'd think he'd just stumbled across some kid parked suspiciously on a dark road and gone over to see what I was up to. He left out the entire reason I was there. No mention that I was the one who called 911. No mention of the drunk driver I'd been following. No mention that the only reason he and I were even standing on that road together was that I'd helped him make an arrest. He just cropped all of that out of the picture, like it was irrelevant. And then he said that I had voluntarily confessed to driving past curfew. Confessed. Like I was some suspect who'd cracked under questioning, instead of a kid who'd openly and honestly explained why he was out late. And that was basically his entire case. He said that was all he needed to prove, that I'd admitted I was driving past curfew, and he pretty much left it right there. Case closed as far as he was concerned. The law is the law, remember. It didn't seem to even occur to him that the why might matter to anyone. I sat there listening to it, and I felt my nerves harden into something steadier, because I realized his whole case depended on the judge never hearing the full story. And I was about to tell the judge the full story. Then it was my turn to talk, and I stayed calm, and I laid it all out. I said, yes, I did drive past curfew. I'm not denying that. But I explained why. I said I had noticed a driver swerving all over the road, and I followed him because I genuinely believed he was going to hurt or kill someone. I said that if I had just let that man drive off into the night, I truly believed he would have ended a life. And I reminded the court that it was 911 themselves who told me to keep following him. Then I handed my evidence up to the judge, and I made sure the officer got copies too. I showed them the call log proving I'd called before curfew, and I made my main point, that I would have been home on time easily if it hadn't been for this drunk driver. My being out late was entirely because I was doing the thing 911 asked me to do. And then I made the argument I'd really come to make. I argued that I'd had a completely reasonable belief that this man was dangerously drunk. And I pointed out that the police themselves were accusing that driver of having a blood alcohol level of 0.12, well over the legal limit. And right there in the courtroom, the judge actually turned to the officer and asked him directly about the driver's BAC. And I held my breath a little because this was the moment where it all either held together or fell apart. And the officer confirmed it. Point 1-2. Out of his own mouth. On the record. And I remember this small, quiet feeling of the whole thing clicking into place, because the same officer who was trying to paint me as some rule breaker had just personally verified to the judge that the man I'd followed was genuinely, dangerously drunk. So now my belief that the guy was a real threat wasn't just a scared teenager's opinion anymore. It was a fact, confirmed by law enforcement, sitting right there in the official record. He'd basically just handed me the strongest piece of my own defense, and then I brought it home with the justification defense. Here's the argument I made. I said that driving past curfew is what's called a summary offense, basically the lowest, most minor kind of violation there is. And I said that drunk driving, on the other hand, is at absolute minimum a misdemeanor, and at the very worst, if that man had killed someone, it could have been a first-degree felony. So I told the judge that the justification law clearly applied to what I did. Because the whole point of that law is that sometimes you're allowed to break a small rule in order to prevent a much bigger harm. And drunk driving was, without any question, the far greater of the two evils. And I made sure to point out that the entire time I myself had been driving completely safely. I wasn't speeding, I wasn't reckless. I was just carefully following a dangerous man and reporting him. And then I stopped talking and I waited. And honestly, my heart was pounding out of my chest. That few seconds of silence before the judge responded felt like it lasted an hour. Because I'd put everything I had into those few minutes, and now it was completely out of my hands, and I had no idea which way it was going to go. I remember just staring at the judge, trying to read his face, and not being able to. And then the judge agreed with me. He found me not guilty. He said that I had proven my defense by what's called a preponderance of the evidence, which basically means I'd shown that it was more likely than not that I'd been justified in what I did. And then he said the thing I'd been aching to hear from somebody in a position of authority ever since that officer stood on the side of the road and wrote me that ticket. He looked at me and he said that I had done the right thing. I can't really describe the wave of relief and, honestly, pride that went through me when he said that. Because it wasn't just that I'd won. It was that a judge, an actual judge, someone whose whole job is deciding right from wrong under the law, had looked at everything I did and told me, out loud in an official courtroom, that I'd been right the whole time. After weeks of that ticket making me feel like a criminal, that one sentence washed all of it away. I'm going to get my collateral back in the mail in a few days. That's the money I'd had to put up to fight the case. And my record is completely clean, like none of it ever happened. So yeah, that's how it ended. I did the right thing. I got punished for it. And instead of just quietly paying up and swallowing the unfairness of it, I refused to accept it. I taught myself how to fight it. And I stood up in a courtroom by myself and I won. And here's what I keep thinking about now that it's over. I don't actually think that officer was a bad guy. I really don't. I think he was just so locked into the law is the law that he completely stopped being able to see the difference between someone breaking a rule to cause harm and someone bending a rule to prevent it. To him, a violation was a violation, full stop, and the reason behind it didn't matter at all. And I understand why the system trains people to think that way. But that night, on the side of the road, it felt cold and it felt wrong, because the whole reason I was out past curfew was that I was trying to do exactly what a good person is supposed to do. The thing I'm proudest of isn't even really that I won. It's that I didn't let being a scared teenager stop me from standing up for myself. It would have been so much easier to just mail in the money and make it disappear. That's what I almost did. And if I had, I'd have spent a long time feeling like I got steamrolled for helping people. Instead, I get to know that I stood in front of a judge and a police officer and made my case. And I was found not just not guilty, but actually right. And I'll tell you one last thing. If I saw that same drunk driver swerving down the road tomorrow night, curfew or no curfew, ticket or no ticket, I would do the exact same thing all over again. because a summary offense and a fine is nothing next to somebody's life. It was worth it then, and it would be worth it again.